everybody. Thanks for joining me again. So today we're going to be looking at muscle contraction. It's going to be building on the knowledge that you will probably have got from your level 2 qualifications. So hopefully quite a bit of this will seem fairly familiar. So let's get started. So there are 3 different kinds of muscle fibers that we've got inside our body. We've got cardiac, smooth, and skeletal. The one you're probably most familiar with is the skeletal muscle, but it's important to know about the 3 different types. So let's have a little look. So our cardiac muscle is only found in our heart, and another word for it is the myocardium. Now it's striated, which is another word for stripy, and you've probably heard that in skeletal muscle that it's striated. And this stripy sort of look of it is created by the sarcomeres that are the contractile elements of muscle. It's involuntary, we have no control over it. It connects to muscle cells and it's only able to generate energy aerobically. So the heart doesn't have an anaerobic capacity. It must have an ongoing supply of oxygen to function. Smooth muscle is quite a different kind of muscle. That's found in all the different sort of tube systems of our body. Now, you may have heard of it when we discussed peristalsis, which is in the digestive system, that movement of food along the esophagus and along the different tubes of the digestive system, that squeezing action. And you may also have heard of it with the blood vessels as well, that's those aligned with smooth muscle. It's also part of the reproductive system, the respiratory system, and the urinary system. Like cardiac muscle, it's involuntary, but this is non-striated. It doesn't have that stripy appearance with the sarcomeres. And the action that we get in this is that constriction and dilation of the tubes, the narrowing and the widening of the tubes. And then finally, the one we're most familiar with probably is our skeletal muscle, which brings about movement of our muscles connected to our skeleton. So on the whole, these are voluntary muscles, but we do have some of our deep muscles are postural muscles, and these will involuntarily contract to counteract the changes of position of our body. Skeletal muscle is also striated like cardiac muscle, but it's able to generate energy both aerobically and, where necessary, anaerobically as well. So let's have a little look at muscle structure. So let's start looking at the connective tissue. Now, the very outside, so the wrapping of a muscle is called epimysium. So this, we remember it because it's sort of epic. It's the biggest one, it's on the outside, so that's epimysium. Now, a muscle is made up of a bundle of muscle fibers, and around each of these bundles of muscle fibers is another layer of connective tissue called the perimysium. So that's kind of the middle one. And then each bundle of muscle fibers is made up of many individual muscle fibers, and these are about the width of a human hair. And these are covered in the deepest layer of fascia, which is called the endomysium. So we've got the epimysium, the perimysium, and the endomysium. Now, all these sort of individual layers of connective tissue are in fact all become connected, and they merge in to make the tendon, which is that tough, regular, dense connective tissue that attaches the muscle to the bone. So then we've got the muscle fiber itself is made up of many individual myofibrils. So a myofibril is made up itself of many different myofilaments. So they're these layers from the muscle fiber to muscle fibrils, and the muscle fibrils are made up of the myofilaments, which are the actin and myosin proteins. Now we get this stripy appearance from these repeated sections called sarcomeres that have the dark and the light bands, hence the stripes. And you can see these in the images below that they can be relaxed or they can be contracted. So these are the contractile elements of a muscle. So let's just move on from there because we'll have more discussion about these things later. But I just want you to remember the different layers of fascia in this and the overall structure of the muscle consisting of many bundles of muscle fibers, each bundle consisting of many individual muscle fibers comprising of many different myofibrils, and the myofibrils are made up of the myofilaments of actin and myosin. So many different layers to remember. So here we go. This is just what I've just been saying. Tendon joining muscle to bone, that epimysium, which is that tough connective tissue surrounding the entire muscle, perimysium surrounding the bundle of muscle fibers, endomysium providing that sheath for the myocyte, which is another word for our muscle cell or muscle fiber, the myofibrils being those rod-like units of each individual muscle cell, and you've also then got the myofilaments, which is what the myofibrils are made up of, and these are the proteins. We're getting right down to the microscopic elements here of the proteins of the myosin and the actin. So that term again of the sarcomere being the basic contractile unit of each muscle fiber and comprising those two parts, actin and myosin. So actin being the thin part and myosin being the fat part. And this is the layer at which we are getting our actual muscle contraction happening. Those are just some images to show some of the structures and the different layers. So we've got the fiber, the fibrils, and the filaments. So the sliding filament theory describes the theoretical and well, the actual contraction, the processes that occur within a sarcomere, which is our unit of muscle contraction. And for order for that to occur, we have to have two things. We have to have calcium and we have to have ATP, which is our energy currency, our adenosine triphosphate. So this is where the nervous system and the muscular system, we need to kind of see them as constantly interacting. So we get nervous stimulation from our afferent nerves, and this causes the heads of the myosin to attach to the actin, forming cross bridges. Now let me just take a step aside for 1 minute to describe the actin and the myosin. The myosin looks like double-headed golf club. So that's the big, thick, fat one. Think of a golf club with two big black heads. And the actin is like a double strand of pearls that's been twisted. And then as contraction occurs, those myosin heads, like those golf club heads, attach into that twisted string of pearls and ratchet it along. So the myosin heads actually pivot and pull the actin towards the center of the sarcomere, and the process is repeated time and time again, with the myosin attaching further along the actin each time. This requires energy in the form of ATP, and the calcium helps by opening up, really revealing those binding sites for the myosin on the actin strands. So here again is another image of the muscle fiber showing the many different myofibrils, and then going down a structural layer, it shows each individual myofibril, shows the sarcomere, and the sarcomere comprising of that actin and myosin. And there are many different sort of zones and lines that you don't really need to know at this level, but it's quite interesting to help you to understand why it's got the different stripes and why muscles look different when they're contracted to when they're relaxed. So motor unit recruitment. Let me just see what we've got here. So a motor unit is a motor neuron, and a neuron is a muscle cell. So that's the the motor neuron, and the muscle fibers that it innervates. So that is one motor unit, the motor neuron and the individual muscle fibers that it innervates. Let me just go back. Okay, so we can see here the spinal cord. We can see nerves coming out of the spinal cord and then splitting and coming onto the individual muscle fibers. So there are a number of different motor units there, and shows how interconnected the nervous system and the muscular system is. So the strength of an actual muscle contraction is going to be affected by two things. It's going to be affected by how often, the frequency of the nerve impulses that arrive at the muscle cell, and also the number of motor units that are activated. So there are going to be many different motor units within one muscle, and depending on the required force, the body will recruit a certain number of motor units. So for a small action, only a few motor units will be activated. But if a great deal of force is required, then maximal number of motor units will be recruited. So this often comes up, a motor unit, understanding it's a neuron and the muscle fibers it innervates, and that the strength of contraction is affected by the frequency of impulses and the number of units activated. So we've got different kinds of muscle fibers within our muscle. So every muscle will have a variety of types of fibers. We've got our type 1 and our type 2 fibers. Type 1 are our slower fibers, slow twitch, and our type 2 are our fast twitch fibers. Our type 2 are actually divided into two different kinds, our fast oxidative glycolytic and our fast glycolytic, or sometimes they're just called fast oxidative and fast glycolytic. So we look at three different types, but they're under type 1 and type 2, if you see what I mean. So the type 1 are our slow oxidative fibers. Now, the word oxidative tells us that it needs a lot of oxygen, and so we're going to need a lot of blood to bring all the oxygen to those muscles. So those fibers are red in color because they're rich in mitochondria, and they've got a very good blood supply to bring the necessary oxygen there. And these kind of muscle fibers are very good for the endurance kind of activities. It's just ongoing, just keep going, slow and steady. The fast twitch type of fibers tend to be whiter in color because they've got a lower number of mitochondria, and they don't require such a good blood supply really, because they don't keep functioning for as long. So these are used for sort of shorter time strength and anaerobic kinds of activities. So that's an overview of our two different kinds: slow twitch, which are more endurance fibers, red in color, and then our fast twitch are two different kind of fast twitch fibers, and these are whiter in color, and these are for the more strength and anaerobic short-term activities. So as I said, the type 2 fibers are subdivided. Type 2A are fast oxidative glycolytic, and these are kind of like intermediate ones. They have the capacity through training or specific use to become either more like the type 1 endurance fibers, if that's the kind of activity we do more of, or they can become more like the type 2 fast glycolytic, which are the more strength and power type of fibers, if that's the kind of activities we focus on more. So the 2A are the intermediates, and then the 2B are our real fast glycolytic fibers. Now, it can help, this might not help at all, but sometimes we think of these muscle fibers in terms of animals. And the type 1, think of the cow in a field, slowly plodding round, and we think of the meat in a cow is red meat, and it just endurance kind of just keeps going. The type 2A we sometimes think of as being a bit like a pig because they're pink in color, like halfway between the red and the white ones, and they just kind of trundle around. And then we've got our type 2 bees, which are more like our chickens. Imagine a chicken pecking around or suddenly squawking and running around. They're white, like you think white meat for a chicken, and they tend to have the faster activities and the more yes, so that may or may that may or may not help you thinking of them in terms of these different animal types. Again, here we go. It's just another chart, just showing the difference in colour, the difference in fibre type, and the kind of activities with which they occur. So let's move on to thinking about the recruitment order. So motor units are recruited in order of size, always starting with the smaller ones first and then building up to the larger ones as needed. And the smaller units tend to contain a large number of the type 1 kind of fibres. So this is for your endurance and your fine control. The large motor units contain large numbers of the type 2 fibres, which are more to do with your strength, speed, and power. Depending on the need for recruitment, motor units can be recruited simultaneously to get to that sort of really forceful contraction, or if you need more of an ongoing, longer lasting contraction, they can alternately contract and relax in sequence to provide that less intense but more enduring contraction. So, if the nervous system needs to generate more force, they'll recruit more motor units, and for a lesser degree of force, the nervous system will recruit a smaller number of motor units. Now, the all or none law, I think I've got an image here. Oh, it's not very clear, but I've got an image here just to show this concept of the all or none law. So if we go back, when an impulse is sent down a neuron, all the muscle fibers within that motor unit will be innervated. So it has to be all the muscle fibers or none of the muscle fibers. So a motor unit is either fully on or fully off. There is no partial stimulation or contraction of a motor unit. So the impulse has to be sufficient to set off the contraction of all the motor units. So let's now go back to that image. You can see how we've got stimulation strength gradually building up. Nothing happens until we hit a certain threshold, and then we get a full response of all those muscle fibers being innervated and contracting. So that's our all or none law. All the muscle fibers within a motor unit contracts, or none of them does. And in order for them to contract, the firing stimulus has to reach a certain threshold, then they will all fire together. I know there's a lot of content here, so you may need to take a breather, but you're doing really, really well, and we're getting there. So the next thing we need to be aware of is the sodium and potassium pump. And this system is important in both muscle and nerve cells. And what it does, it maintains the electrical charge within a cell. Because if you remember, our nervous system is like an electrical wiring system, and it's so interconnected with our muscular system that it's really important to maintain this sodium-potassium potential. So, in nerve transmission and in muscle contraction, both things, you've got sodium being pumped out of the cell and potassium being pumped out of the cell. And there's a difference in the ratio. So you get 2 sodium ions being pumped out. Three sodium ions are moved out and 2 potassium ions move in. And so we get an electrical charge differential across the membrane that causes a nervous impulse or a muscle contraction. So we've got a little picture here. So you can see the inside of the cell is the underneath bit, and the outside of the cell is the top. You can see you've got a cell. That's the cell membrane, is all the yellow things with all the tails. That's your phospholipid bilayer. And then the purple thing is actually a transport protein. So what we've got, Na is sodium, and you can see how there are 3 little holes for the red sodium ions to fit into, and 2 for the potassium. Now this channel is very clever. The sodium will connect in, and then you've got ATP allows for a change in the shape of the cell. You've got that triphosphate, that one phosphate group attaches to that, changes the shape of the carrier protein, which releases then the sodium out into the outside of the cell. And whilst it's open, 2 potassium come in. So if you just see that as an ongoing cycle. So you've got your potassium being pumped out, your sodium being pumped out, and your potassium being pumped in. And this allows for either electrical impulses or for muscle contraction. So remember, this requires ATP to transport sodium and potassium ions across the cell membrane. 3 sodium out, 2 potassium in. So this pump, this sodium potassium pump, also maintains the kind of the pH, that's the acid base balance, as well as healthy kidney function in the body. So it helps with homeostasis to maintain that correct level of acid base balance. So energy is gained from pumping the sodium outside the cell where it becomes concentrated and it wants to push its way back in. And this energy is used to remove excess acid from the body, powered by ATP. And as I've said, for each ATP that's broken down, each molecule of ATP, 3 sodium move out, 2 potassium ions move in. And if this is kind of just frying your head, you may want to go onto YouTube, and there's a link here to a video you may find useful to watch. So the effects of exercise on the nervous system, you may have seen this already on our nervous system PowerPoint talk. So by the exercise itself will help to reinforce existing pathways and connections that are in the nervous system, and you can also develop new connections as well. The nervous system is what we term sort of a plastic, if you like. It's adaptable, and the more you practice or use certain connections or learn new skills, you will actually strengthen existing ones and develop new connections. That's how we learn. That's skill acquisition. Exercise improves the synchronization of motor recruitment. So the more we exercise, the better synchronicity of our motor units that occurs, and which just means we can get stronger muscular contractions the more we practice it. The body learns how to achieve that stronger muscular contraction. Our balance improves because all the proprioceptors that we have within our muscles and within our tendons become more efficient and more sort of practiced. So we get better firing of muscles to help us improve our balance. We get better speed due to the increased frequency and strength of nervous impulses. We get improved agility because, again, of that speed and frequency of signal and neural connections. And we get an improvement in the coordination of our muscle groups working together. So these are all of our motor skills. So improvement in all that different layer of motor skills, strength, balance, speed, agility, and that coordination as well. So now we're going to have a little look at plyometric exercises. So you can see from the images that I've put up that plyometrics involve powerful, fast, sort of ballistic style movements. So they've got certain elements to it. You've got a rapid eccentric lengthening of a muscle, like preparing to do a jump, the shortening the concentric muscle activity in fast sequences, And this makes use of what's called the stretch shortening cycle. So by doing this, by repeatedly practicing these kind of powerful, fast movements, we can strengthen the elasticity, the nervous connections and strength of our muscles and tissues that are involved in those actions of running, jumping, and throwing. This leads to a greater ability and kind of explosive power that's needed in, a good deal of sporting activities. If you think about things like the triple jump or a number of athletics where you need that explosive power, this is where the ballistic training of plyometric exercise really comes into its own. So just going back to the different phases of a plyometric movement, imagine you're going to do a jump. So the first thing you do is kind of lower down that eccentric rapid lengthening. And then there's a brief period called the amortization, which is your resting period, which you want to be as short as possible because you get wastage here of elastic energy. And then that concentric shortening where you're doing that ballistic jumping movement. So the purpose of all of this is to enhance the output of power during the concentric phase, as opposed to just doing the concentric phase by itself. So plyometric exercises increase muscular power by using the natural elasticity that we have in our muscles and tendons, as well as the stretch reflex. Now, in the nervous system video, we've looked at the proprioceptive organs, our muscle spindles, and our Golgi tendon organs. So you'll need to watch that in connection with this. But basically, within our muscles, we've got muscle spindles, and they detect changes in muscle length to prevent damage. So in a jump landing phase, the quads must contract eccentrically to slow the movement. And this increases elastic energy in the muscle and tendon as the muscle lengthens. This is then stored, this energy is stored in the muscle, and following the eccentric landing phase with an immediate concentric, such as jumping up again, you can then use that stored energy and release to create a more powerful force in total. So just to reinforce the stretch reflex. So this is what happens at the muscle spindle. It's the body's response to muscular stretch. This is an involuntary response initiated by the muscle spindles, which we've got sort of wound around our muscle fibers deep in our muscles. And these detect the speed and intensity of any particular stretch. So think about that jumping, that plyometric jumping, that's going to detect the rapid stretch of the quads when landing, and the response of those muscle spindles is to contract the quadriceps even harder. So increasing the activity of the quads to prevent overstretching, and so that increases the force of the muscles. You can see that little image there, how when it's stretched, that's when you've got all the firing. The little lines at the bottom show how much firing is going to happen, as opposed to when it's relaxed or contracted. Again, I've just put another image in here just to show that muscle stretch reflex. So you get step one, you're getting the stretching of the muscle, stimulates the muscle spindle, activation of the sensory neuron going back to the spinal cord. You get the processing happening there. The step four being the activation of your motor neuron that sends information, causing that contraction of a muscle. And that's it for our muscle contraction. So quite a lot to take in there, I know. So you may want to go back over it, just have a look at the PowerPoint without me talking. Remember your manual as well. So do take time to try and go over and really process all that information. Okay, all the best. Well done. Bye-bye.